What's going on, guys? Bingo here. I'm with the Dual Factor for episode 37 of X-2 Drop, our Yu-Gi-Oh podcast we do every week talking about something that we've wanted to talk about in the trading card game, whether it's the metagame, a random topic, or what we've played at locals, who knows. But this week, the question is Yu-Gi-Oh too hard for new players? And this question comes from a couple of things. I've tried to get a few friends to come into the game, and really the barrier to entry is very high because of the nature of the game with no rotating card lists. What is it, 15 years now of new mechanics being introduced and just the power creep of the game. So there's a lot of things to talk about, and I'm pretty excited because this is something that a lot of other card games don't really have because you have that set rotation and you have a finite card pool to play from. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh does too, but it's a lot bigger. So, Joe, what's your initial thoughts on the topic and like just your immediate reactions to the question?
So is it hard to learn or to like get people to like playing the game like casually? No, just sitting around playing with your friends and stuff like that. It's not hard at all. It's very easy to learn and stuff like that. But when you step it up to the competitive level of playing the game, that's where it gets a little tricky because there's a lot of stuff you have to learn how to navigate and stuff like that, especially with how specific card text is in most Yu-Gi-Oh cards, especially with rulings and stuff like that. So it's more of a question of not getting people to play Yu-Gi-Oh, but at what level they want to play Yu-Gi-Oh, I think.
Yeah, and that's a fair point because basic Yu-Gi-Oh is super easy. Like, for like speed duels, for example, is relatively easy to teach somebody, or vanilla Yu-Gi-Oh or the starter decks with like the 20 cards that they give out. Learner decks, I think they're called, and it's pretty easy to like teach somebody the basic fundamentals of like what the flow of the general game is. But even that, like, that can be complex because you teach somebody, okay, you got your draw phase, your standby phase, main phase, battle phase, main phase 2, and end phase. And there's a lot of niche things that go into just that general phases. Like, okay, when you're changing phases, your opponent gets a chance to respond to the act of changing phases. And then in the battle phase, you have something as complex as the damage step, which has like four phases on its own.
I think it's like 7 substeps, something like that. Shout out to the understanding.
And then you get into, okay, you can't activate certain cards in the damage step, but you can activate other ones that have similar effects, but they negate the activation versus negating the effect. So like the deeper you go into the mechanics of the game, the more off-putting it is to just somebody who saw a structure deck at Walmart that looked pretty cool and they wanted to get into it.
And that's what I think the big problem is, especially when you're trying to get someone into the player base and stuff like that. Because if you're just trying to get into the game like straight off at like competitive mindset, like you said, like battle phase is one of the most confusing phases in the entire game, especially since, like you were saying, it has like either 4 or 7 substeps like we can't remember and stuff like that. And that makes it really, really complicated and complex, especially for a new player, you know what I mean? And then you take it even further with the English language and Yu-Gi-Oh being a bitch, especially having to tell the difference between what is a cost, what is a card effect, what starts a chain, what doesn't start a chain, and then teaching chain links itself and stuff like that. And that's where you start to get where it gets really complex and starts to get really, really confusing. And that's why I think it off-puts a lot of players. And especially like you'll see it in other card games too. Like say for example, you got friends who play Magic and Pokemon and you try to get them to convert over to Yu-Gi-Oh. They might find it harder to do that, especially like Magic players and stuff like that, because they come from a game where this might sound like a foreign concept, but you can interrupt chain links. And that's not something in Yu-Gi-Oh that you can do. So I think that's where you start seeing the layers of complexity and start seeing the barriers between games and even new players.
Yeah, real quick before I respond, you're a little quiet. I don't know if you're far from your mic. Like, I can hear you, but it's a lot quieter than you usually are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So, just looking at Pokemon, for example, like, it's a very, very simple game at its core. You have your energy attachments, you have your one supporter for the turn, and you have where you do everything, and then your attack ends your turn. Like, in Magic the Gathering, the effects, I don't want to say they're simple, but it's a lot clearer. They use keywords to define effects rather than writing everything out, because Konami doesn't want to do that. Now they have simplified it over the years with problem-solving card text, introducing words like piercing and banished and just a couple of things, but the guys that make the game said that they don't want you to need a user manual to play the game, which I think is just a crazy concept in itself with how intricate the effect interactions in the game can be.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think another thing that you think about the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, and then like I said, for new players and players migrating from other card games, Yu-Gi-Oh is one of the few tabletop out of the big. We'll say the big three: Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon. Right? We'll consider that the big three of card games. It's the only one really out of the two where you're literally playing during every single turn. You're not just playing on your turn. And what I mean by that is it's very rare that you see other people interact during your turn in other card games versus this one. Especially with like the introduction of terms like hand traps, trapped and spell cards that can be played during your opponent's turns, monster effects that are quick effects, like all that stuff. That's like a very foreign concept to other games and stuff like that. So that's like another level of complexity that you add to the game. Now, once you've seen it and heard the terms and stuff like that, then it all kind of like, life melds together and it makes it easier to play. But initially, I personally, especially when I was learning how to play at a competitive level, I thought it was very overwhelming at first. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I would totally agree because I had a 12 and a half year break from the game. So I mean, essentially, I was starting from GOAT format knowledge as a young teenager to the whole game before link summoning. So I had to learn synchros, I had to learn XEs, Pendulum, and all of the new cards that were relevant. And it was honestly overwhelming. I had to just isolate a mechanic and isolate just a deck and play casually because there was just so much and so many cards to learn that it just wasn't reasonable to like study to play the game,
That's almost what it comes down to, honestly, if you think about it, because you have to. Like, I remember when I was getting back into the game, because I had played up till 2007 when I was in high school. And then I had graduated in my freshman year of college. A coworker of mine, when I was working at a Subway, got me back into the game. And I remember the weeks and weeks of research that I did looking at new decks, new strategies, what topped, what was good, what wasn't good, and then looking at the master rule changes. Like, I came back to a game that when I left it, we had priority. And then fast forward into the future, we didn't have priority. So that was like a whole rule change. And then I saw the master rule change and stuff like that. And like I said, it took me like 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks before I was comfortable going to a local setting and actually sitting down and playing with other people and seeing how these interactions actually worked and in real life versus just what I was hearing on YouTube and what I was theorying on Dueling Network when we still had it.
Yeah, and when you're forced to learn the game, like what I always say is, I have a list of like 5 to 10 decks that are mechanically simple that can play on a casual competitive level. Like it has a win condition. It might not be the best, but it, like Satellar Knights, for example. Satellar Knights is a fantastic deck to learn the game because you utilize monster effects, the extra deck, traps, spells. You use everything, but it's not overly complex. You have your normal summon per turn, maybe a special summon, and then you can go into the extra deck. And that's honestly the deck that I use to teach just about anybody that I come across with about like from the ground up fundamentals.
That's actually a very good way to actually look at it, especially learning it. Because like I almost want to say it's to the point now where you can't give someone a goat deck and tell them to learn the game. Now, that was like the go-to way to learn how to play it too, because Go format teaches you the basics of Yu-Gi-Oh, and also it teaches you something that a lot of players don't have anymore, which is resource management.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It teaches you the value of card economy a lot more than modern day Yu-Gi-Oh.
The problem is with it, though, is that because Go format is so slow compared to modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, that you're learning all these basic fundamentals and stuff like that, but they almost become irrelevant because if you look at today's formats and stuff like that, it's nothing like classic Yu-Gi-Oh used to be. And that's where I think you see a lot of frustrations and stuff pop out, especially when you see people trying to get into the game. Not that I don't think it's fun, because I actually thoroughly enjoy playing the game because I like all those intricacies and stuff like that. But it's very frustrating at first when you understand, well, why can't I do this? Because this card reads this and stuff like that.
Yeah, see, I would say GOAT format, like the fundamentals that it teaches you are the things that the advanced players try to master. You know, the resource management, the one-on-one interactions in the modern metagame that, you know, what can net you the most advantage, what can cost your opponent the most resources to stop. And when you're learning the game, like, it's good to be conscious that those things exist, but your priority should be learning everything on top of that. You know, like there's five extra deck summoning mechanics. I mean, if you count Pendulum.
Let's see, Link, Synchro, XYZ, Fusion, and yeah, that's 5.
Yeah, so you got 5 extra deck mechanics, then Ritual and Tribute summoning for the main deck mechanics, plus your normal summon, and then all of the decks in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, they can be overwhelming for somebody who's playing a casual deck. So like nobody wants to go to locals their first week and just get completely obliterated, and like it kind of discourages you from like going back. It's like, okay, the guy's talking about how much his deck costs, and he's like, oh, this is like $400-$800 worth of cards, and the guy's like, well, why would I even bother playing if I have to do that to win the game?
See, here's the thing where I'm going to counter argue. All right.
Yeah.
You say people don't want to show up to locals, their very first locals, and get smacked around by when they go to their first locals, right?
Well, to an extent. Like, no one expects to go winning. It's a learning experience, and everybody says that.
No, I understand that, but the thing is, Douglas French shows up to locals every week and gets smacked around and keeps returning happily. So, you know.
So, what I guess what I'm saying is when you're going up against, let's say a couple formats ago, Dragon Link, like, or the Pendulum boards from, I guess, even modern day, they're not fun to play against. Or a hand loop or an FTK. Nobody, like, if you sit down and your opponent just like Gumblar looped your hand out, like, let's say that was your first locals, God forbid, like, you're not going to want to play anymore, or it's going to be really hard to continue to want to invest in the game.
I'm not going to lie to you. If I was a brand new player and I came up against some dude playing OG Goki, like back in 2018 Nationals format, I would want to Batista bomb them through the table. Like, 100%. Because I don't know, for those of you who actually had to play during that format, but that was the most infuriating thing in the world. They were either going to extra link you or they were going to take your hand and extra link you. There was no in between.
It's like, or both. And I guess, like, at Die Hard or my old locals, you've been going still. They had an A and B bracket for the competitive players, and then, you know, the younger players or the casual players. And I thought, I mean, it was a little frustrating because it was split prize pools, but it was good for those players because, you know, going up against you, me, Doug, or Josh, it's probably not going to be a fun time.
Yeah, you ever felt the sense of when we were playing in like those games and stuff like that before they were doing the split bracket that we were just bullying some of those young players?
Now,
Because that's basically what it boils down to.
And that's why half the weeks I played before they split brackets, I played like bad decks. Like I remember this kid and his mom were my round two opponent, or round one, I don't remember. He was playing, just all the cards I have the deck, and I was playing Dark Magician,
if you will.
And like he was doing his thing, and I didn't want to just straight destroy him, so like I'd slow roll it, I'd let him do things, but like I know for a fact there was never a point in the game where I was even close to losing, but like I wanted to make the kid feel, he was like 12 years old, and I wanted to make him feel like the game's worth playing.
Oh, you are 100% correct on that one. I'll never forget, I was watching, this was back during Yeti Games in Springfield. One of our local players, Skip, was there, and he was with the local Inzector player, if you will, because that man never gives up on Inzectors. But he got paired up against some kid, and I remember watching him throw a match. Just so that the kid didn't feel bad or anything like that, because like he came to locals every week, and he kept getting smacked around by all players and stuff like that. And the pure joy in that kid's face by simply winning that one game that Skip let him win made the whole difference.
Yeah, that could something as small as that could be the kid turning this into a crack addiction, or just stop playing altogether. You never know. But if you had to pick the hardest thing for a new player to understand, or the highest entry barrier into the game, what would it be?
Missing the timing.
Okay, I mean, that is a big one that certain people still have a problem with.
I'm just saying that's going to be one of the biggest things, and I know that was one of the biggest changes for me is when when we actually got problem-solving text and stuff like that. Because beforehand, it was really, really hard to tell the difference and stuff like that. But even then, as older players now and stuff like that, it's a very hard concept to get through, to get the difference between if and when effects, and it's just like, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. If you haven't played the game and you get into the game, you're going to be frustrated when you first get into it. But then once you sit down and actually read the actual card text and stuff like that, you'll understand why that makes sense.
When it has come up, how I've been doing it, explaining it, like I haven't been pulling out, my Dupe Frog or my Yang Zings. I've just been using the Ghost Girl hand traps because they're win effects, right? Like they have to be chained directly to the action that happened. So it can't be at a random point. Now, obviously, you get with the Yang Zings, it's a little different because you can just like do anything and then Masterpiece pop it and it misses timing. So that's a little different, but I mean, that's how I introduced the concept of win effects, because it's just easier because those are meta relevant cards that are almost always played, and then it helps like get your mind working, because missing timing still pisses me off. The fact that they printed cards this year that miss timing.
Exactly. See, how long have we been playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh? And it's one of the things that's still like the most frustrating thing in the world. Just putting that out there.
For me, the most difficult thing to understand, it has to do with inherent summons or cards that don't start a chain, like Return of the Dragon Lords in the graveyard and random stuff like that. Because it doesn't really make sense why they don't start a chain. Or Black Horn of Heaven is a card that I look at and it like kind of frustrates me explaining it to new players.
Black Horn of Heaven is probably the most frustrating counter trap in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna.
Because like when you read it, it seems super good, like almost all the time. But then you actually understand it, and it's just a worse Solemn Strike.
It's just not worth it, because like it literally says when your opponent special summons a monster, the original card tag, it just reads when your opponent special summons a monster, negate that summon. and it was printed in a time when there was no problem-solving card text, so you think it can stop anything. And that's what I originally thought when I first read the card, and then I think it got updated text at some point, I don't know. But then you're like, oh, I can only stop inherent summons, and then you have to go through and you're looking at it. And the funny thing is, inherent summon's not actually a real term in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, which is really frustrating. Like, I would love for Konami to make keywords. Like, I don't see why they can't just put, piercing, like, quick effect, target negate, like whatever they decide the term is for a specific type of effect. Now, obviously, each effect is so unique in some situations that you can't fit everything. But if you can have blanket statements that get rid of the 187 words on Master of Endymion, then it would be great. The thing is a freaking essay.
Well, I think another thing that makes it kind of frustrating with Yu-Gi-Oh cards is they give you this super little card with this even smaller box for the text, and they just try to cram as much text in there as possible, and then just like, have fun.
I was watching, I think it was JayWhit's video. He was a huge Nintendo channel that like got really big into Yu-Gi-Oh, or back into the game, just like learning it again. He's not like a player, but he's a huge YouTuber. And he said there was a study by somebody, it doesn't matter, that the smallest text you can use that doesn't cause an inconvenience in a printed form is 6-point font, and Yu-Gi-Oh cards are printed in like 4.5 font. So like they're just so small, and it's just so frustrating when you have to like squint and read a card, and then you have to take your opponent's card. You're on a time limit, and you have to read everything and understand it and just remember it, because you don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, what's that do again? What's that do again? Every single time.
It's frustrating. It is very, very frustrating when you break it down to that point.
So, with the introduction of Master Rule 4 and the changes into the board, do you think that makes it easier for new players to grasp? Or do you think link summoning just, again, added another level of overcomplication to the game that could turn people off?
I think it's more of a yes and no type thing. Because, like, link summoning, obviously, like, it completely changed how, like, the extra deck mechanic works for Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, because now, like, certain monsters can only be summoned to certain zones and stuff like that. But link summoning as a whole is actually very, very easy to grasp and stuff like that. Especially considering it only takes X amount of monsters to make it. Now, when you start reading the recipes and stuff like that on the cards, then it gets a little more complex. But as a whole, I don't think link summoning made it harder or easier to get into the game. I think it was just kind of like a neutral add at that point, especially for new players, because to new players, this is just normal, right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the non-complexity of not having a limited extra deck or limited zones to summon extra deck monsters too. Where I think it creates a more of a problem is for people who have been playing the game and then they get introduced to this new mechanic, and everything they've learned and knew how to play with, that completely changes. So I think that's a change that's for players who were playing beforehand versus new players. Well, hey, this is completely new, and there is no difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say, well, let's turn back the clock and just say link summoning was the first extra deck mechanic after fusions. So when it goes links, synchros, Xyz, and then pendulum, nobody would have had a problem with it. Like the way it works is actually relatively easy. You just saw all the player backlash for changing what we have known to expect, right?
Yeah.
And that was the only reason, because like you said, I do think it is the simplest mechanic to grasp. Like with Xyz, you have these materials are not cards on the field. They're not in the grave. They're just kind of in limbo. Then synchros, you have to mess with tuners and non-tuners. Pendulum, you got your scales. And that like face up extra deck. Like Pendulum, I think, is the most complicated mechanic. And I do know quite a few people that are just like, they play the game casually and they're just like, I don't even really fully understand the pendulum mechanic.
Just saying, I will agree with you. The pendulum mechanic is by far the most complicated, but it is the most broken.
Yeah, still to this day. Master Rule 3 Pendulum.
Woo. All the sauce, bro. All of it.
All right, so I already said my favorite deck to introduce players to the game. If you had to pick one, what do you think the best starter strategy is for just learning the game? It doesn't have to be good. It's just like teaching multiple mechanics or interactions for the game.
Personally, if I were to pick a deck to introduce someone into the game, that kind of gives you kind of basis of every single mechanic, it would probably honestly be Hero. They do a little bit of everything. They do link summoning. They do fusion summoning. You can exceed with them. There's some really weird.
You probably could synchro somehow, but
it does all sorts of summoning mechanics outside of the extra deck. You have in-hand interactions with quick effects such as Elemental Hero Honest Neos. You have quick play spells. You have normal spells. You can play trap cards in the deck if you want. And one of the big things is it introduces hand traps, because a lot of the builds now for Hero for competitive basis play hand traps. So you'll learn how to play back and forth during your opponent's turn with quick effects and hand traps and stuff like that. So you have a relatively... And the Hero strategy itself is relatively straightforward. So it's just I think that's a good all-around type of deck that you could give to a player who's never played, and they could learn it as they play.
Yeah, which
yeah, especially since all the card effects are just real simple, like this monster searches, this monster.
I believe. Go ahead.
No, like I said, it's just all the effects of the monsters are very, very straightforward, and I don't think there's a whole bunch of complexities in there, and especially with a lot of the hero cards. One of the big things is what that bottom line of text says: you can only activate one of these effects per turn and stuff like that. You'll be able to tell the difference between which effect that you want to play and stuff like that. So that's why I think it's probably one of the easier decks to learn.
Yeah, and the reason I actually started thinking about this topic is I stumbled across the Getting Back into YuGiOh series by a YouTube channel named Ruggles, and like the production quality, the only reason I kept watching is because the production quality of the like vlogs essentially were so high, and like the deck he ended up settling on, he tested a bunch on Dueling Book, was Heroes, and it was basically for that, like mostly its power level is high, its consistency is high, it's not overly complicated to play, and it's just a fun deck. It's cool. The artwork's cool. It's like some of the cards are inspired by like, you know, Marvel, DC characters, and it's just like a big fan favorite, and that's for good reason.
See, I didn't know that dude was making a series and stuff like that, because I've seen it pop up on my newsfeed, but I didn't know that was the deck he was playing.
Yeah, I know the first 2 episodes, he ordered a Malicious Bane, and it took like 3 weeks to get there.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah.
I only say that because I played Heroes this weekend, and Malicious Bane is so broken. I summon that card every game. Every game.
I just remember watching the first 2 episodes, and he would show clips from duels, like the ends of games, and he got cheated 2 different times by his opponent. The best one was the dude normal summoned Skarm, I think, and then Destrudoed, and then synced away into Mare.
Oh,
or not Mare, Yazi. And he's like, I'm going to kill you now. I'm like, that's cheating, dude. But that's another thing coming in as a new player. Like, you don't know all of the cards. You don't know Burning Abyss cards blow themselves up when there's another non-BA on the field. You don't know that Danger Bigfoot only pops face-up cards. Like, there's so many cards that could be at a local scene that you just have to. You're going to get cheated. You're going to get soft cheated. You're going to get hard cheated. You just have to accept that and make sure you're being vigilant, I guess.
Exactly. It's just one of those. You're going to have that in every card game, but I think in Yu-Gi-Oh, you see it more and more often just because of how vast and large the card pool is, or I should say playable card pool.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not malicious. Like, the other guy could be picking up a new deck, and like he just forgot that, again, Bigfoot only targets face-up cards. But we're at like a little over 30 minutes. So, Joe, you got any closing comments on the topic?
In terms of more or less the topic itself, like, it can be overwhelming, but I think it's one of the more enjoyable card games to play. So after like listening to this, if you think about getting people into this game, just show them things that you like about the game. Don't just like overwhelm and just start hitting them with a bunch of technical terms. Just sit there, show them what you like and whatnot, and just go from there. Also, as you guys already know, Douglas French has no sauce, but that's besides the point.
Piccolo, you have no sauce. No. Hey.
All right, I'll end it with something similar. Like, if you got a buddy that wants to play, just find a mechanic, find an old format, find something that you can teach him in a really casual environment, and just explain why certain things work, why they don't work, and like just teach them slowly. But guys, if you have enjoyed the video, please remember to check us out every week, Monday on iTunes and Google Play. We go up at 8 a.m. every day. YouTube.com/BingoHD for my channel, YouTube.com/The Duel Factory for Joe's. If there is a topic that you guys want to see talked about, please let us know somewhere. But with that being said, I'll see you guys next week. Peace out.
Okay, bye.